Hello and welcome to this episode of Battling with Business with me, Gareth Tennant.
And me, Chris Kitchener.
In this podcast, we explore ideas and concepts around teams and teamwork, leaders and leadership, and all things in between. It's a discussion between a former Royal Marines officer and a product manager from the world of business, comparing and contrasting our experiences as we attempt to work out what makes teams, leaders, and businesses tick. And this week, we are joined by another fantastic guest. Chris, who have we got this week?
Well, we always do the thing where we talk to the guest just before we come on, and I suspect she was thinking, yeah, he's buttering me up. I'm genuinely excited that we have Lisa Lloyd joining us, and I'll talk about why I'm so excited. I'm giddy almost with excitement. Lisa's smiling at this, thinking this is can't be true. Lisa, as we'll talk about in a second, I'll do the bio in a second, actually hosted Gareth on her podcast. We'll talk about her podcast a little bit later. And listening to that, we posted that on our stream, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. What struck me was this is an opportunity for us to tackle a topic we've not really managed to get into before. And that is, to some degree, you could almost argue, and actually Gareth told me off this, he says we don't do this, but you could almost argue that we make leadership into this, if you follow these 10 rules, you'll be great leaders. And the thing that has made me really itchy and nervous, not just recently, but over a number of years, is if that were true, we would have discovered everything there is to know about leadership and we would all be amazing leaders by now. And the problem is that doesn't seem to be the case. So there are clearly other factors at play. And one of those is the squishy bit we have between our ears, either as people who are followers or people who are in teams, or as people who are leaders and managers. And there's something there that seems to be a confounding factor or a big impact. So I am very, very pleased to welcome Lisa Lloyd to the podcast today. And just to introduce Lisa properly, for those who perhaps don't know her as well, is Lisa Lloyd is a chartered psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of a company called It's Time for Change. She helps leaders build healthier, high-performing workplace cultures, and she draws on her background in psychology, education, and behavioural science, working with organisations to improve leadership, employee engagement, psychological safety, resilience, and actually, having talked to Lisa and listened to the podcast, a little bit of everything in between as well. She combines evidence-based psychology with practical coaching to help leaders better understand themselves and their teams. And as I've mentioned, she hosts the podcast Beyond the Water Cooler. We'll get Lisa to talk about that a little bit later, where she explores what really drives people and performance at work. So Lisa, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for putting up with already my giddy excitedness about having you on.
What an introduction. I have to say, like, that is gold star in terms of, I've got a lot to live up to now.
I think, well, I get the feeling this is one of those topics that could run and run. It's almost as if you could have your own podcast around some of these topics. But I'm really excited because I think it's going to bring a new dimension to what we've talked about. And as we talked about a little bit before we came on, I don't know that we can solve everything and become magical, better leaders overnight, but just thinking about some of these other factors and talking to people who kind of know what's going on and can talk about it, I think is going to be illuminating. So, I'm going to go straight into my first question. I'm going to go for the really simple one, as you'll see. Why do you think that, given the principles of leadership seem really straightforward on paper, please see our, LinkedIn top 10 ways to be a great leader, it seems so easy, but the moment you get to real life and real people, it seems to fall apart sometimes, or at least be more surprising or more complex than you might imagine.
You've hit the nail on the head earlier when you were saying about it's the stuff between our ears, and we are all so unique. And what I see time and time again is people who are leaders or who are given the role title of a leader don't actually understand what leadership is. And they don't understand that it's a set of behaviours and it takes a huge amount of skill to be able to understand a wide array of needs and to understand what they're experiencing, what they're observing, and to then know how to interact best with that. And that stretches a lot of people who are supposedly equipped to be in that space, let alone the numerous people who are given the kind of leadership role title without any of the support to do that. So I think there's that sense of, I've been given the title of a leader, but I'm approaching leadership in the same way that I'd approach my day-to-day job that I had prior to becoming a leader. And they can approach it in a very operational way. And it's very much a kind of get through a to-do list and keep your head down and be busy and achieve your objectives. And rarely is there enough time for people to step back and question, what do I want to be as a leader? What other people need of me as a leader? How do I go about achieving that? How do I put my hand up and say, I don't really know what that's about. Can someone give me some other ideas? So there's a whole host of understanding yourself in that as a leader, but also understanding what others need of you.
I'd ask the easy question first, obviously. I think there were so many things in there. Maybe I can sort of go one level deeper, which is you talked about understanding yourself and understanding others. And I mean, I'm in sort of building my own vision in my head about this, which is understanding what others need and what others want, and perhaps more importantly, how they behave in as much as yourself. I think we start with this idea that when you talk about individuals, whoever they are in an organization, you start with a blank piece of paper that's the same size, the same piece of paper. In other words, everyone starts from the same basis. In other words, the things I want are the things you want, and how I act is the way you act. From a psychologist's perspective, how do you see human beings? Is there a model that you think about? And I know there's models in leadership. We can maybe talk about those later, but how do you think about that model of there are different kinds of people that operate in different ways? How do you think about that?
So I think fundamentally we all have a set of emotional needs. And if we use those as a kind of guiding principle in terms of if our needs are met well enough, then we thrive. And so that might be a need for control, a need for connection with other people, a need for recognition and status and meaning and purpose. And those are all emotional needs. And when so we all have kind of consistent needs, but how they show up, what they look like, what they mean to each of us is different. And I think when we take time to be curious enough with the people we lead to find out what motivates them, what gives them a sense of meaning and purpose, do they feel connected or isolated? Do they have the sense of control they need, or do they feel that they are being micromanaged? When we take time to really understand what that looks like for them, and we are curious enough to want to find out more about that person, that for me is kind of opens up so many doors in terms of the insights a leader will need to know how to lead that person. Because otherwise we end up viewing people through our own lens. So our set of assumptions and our set of beliefs about the world, we will see other people's behaviours and attribute all sorts of meaning to those that potentially are way off. So a classic is when people go through periods of change and there's lots of resistance to it, and someone thinks that person's just being the awkward so-and-so in the corner, because they don't realise that resistance is about maybe fear, a loss of control, or I'm not going to be very good at what I'm being asked to do in my new role, and therefore I'm going to lose my sense of status and all those sorts of things.
One of the things, by the way, Gareth, you're going to have to jump in, because otherwise I think I'm going to ask all these questions today. One of the things I think we take for granted, I would like to think, I'm using air quotes, I'm a reasonably empathetic person. And so what you've talked about, Lisa, feels natural to me, that I would sit and talk to my people and be curious about them. Clearly, though, there are people for whom that is not natural. They are a different kind of person that just is wired and thought in a different way. I would imagine to them, this is the idea that you should do something as simple as talk to people, understand their motivations, their needs, and those emotions could either sound hippy-dippy, or it could sound just terrifying, because that's not the thing that I want to do. For those people, what's the first step for them? I mean, is it complicated? Is it scary? Or what's the first thing you would do to that person who says, I have never asked a member of my team what they care about? What would you say to them?
I'd say just forget your role as a leader and just imagine that you are in that room with them. If cocktail party is your thing, you're at a cocktail party. If you're on the side of a football pitch, whatever, you're with someone and you are genuinely interested in them as a human being. And so get beyond the kind of the role titles that can put up a lot of barriers for people. Like, I'm supposed to behave in a certain way. I'm supposed to know how to have really good conversations and know what to ask and know how to respond if someone says something to me. And if we just take that pressure off ourselves and just go back to being human, which is being interested. So one of the things I was talking with a team about this afternoon is the value of personal stories. So when you have a team of people who are supposed to be a team, and in reality, lots of them are just groups of people, but when you have a team of people who have been working together for a long time, they don't really know each other. And that sense of being able to, each person just to tell their story about what's something that others don't know about them in their early life, in their childhood, or what is it that got them into doing the job they're doing in the first place. Just starting to kind of shed a little bit more light about who they are as an individual. And that, if you do that as a team, that takes the pressure off the leader doing that individually. And then the leader can follow up on that. So I never realized you were really interested in such and such, or I didn't realize you lived there, and it just starts opening the conversation. And it's having conversations that are, where you just take time to show an interest and ask how people are, asking about their family, asking about what they got on the weekend, making sure you follow up on those conversations, feeding back when you notice that someone's not looking particularly happy, and asking, is there anything I can do to help? I've seen you don't look, your usual bubbly self, or feeding back that I heard you did a great job the other day. The kind of the connection, which is not about having to say, how are you and what motivates you, and making it all kind of formal.
I think that's great. I mean, I've done various of these activities through my career. Everything from on Monday morning, we sit down at a team meeting and say, what did everyone get up at the weekend? And I've actually been in one with an executive team where people revealed an incredibly traumatic life, even to the point of crying. And actually that was humbling. I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but it to your point, you looked at people differently and you saw them as a human being, and you saw them as someone you admired for what they had achieved, and in this case survived. It was really, really powerful. And then every now and then you get a really fun one where one of my team members was a DJ back in the early hip hop years. And you say, sorry, what was that? Oh yeah, no, I was a DJ. I knew all of the great hip hop artists. Really? So I think that's fantastic. Here's a different question, and I don't know this one's as easy to answer, which is, we've just been talking about how we perceive ourselves. How are you doing? What kind of things do you care about? What are your values? That's what we're starting to do. We're starting to create a common group of values and beliefs, understanding who's strong in which areas and how we can support each other. One of the challenges I've found is, what about the stuff we don't know about ourselves? What about the, dare I say it, the lies we tell ourselves about what we want, what we don't want, what we like and what we don't like? This is probably a little bit deeper, but how much should we take for granted what we tell ourselves and what we tell other people?
Well, some people quite like just taking it for granted and just assuming their beliefs at face value. I think where I see teams and leaders working really well together are where people ask for feedback. So there's when people have shared kind of what they think their strengths are. I'm actually doing that with the team at the moment, who are evaluating what they bring to their team and what they feel really good at and what they feel they're not so good at. And each person in the team is having an opportunity to feed back and say, actually, this is what I really appreciate about you, and this is what you bring to the team. And you can do that kind of just in a quick conversation, or you can do that through a more sort of extended activity. And the insights that come out of that are phenomenal, because I've when you have a leader who's reading feedback from other people, and I'm not talking about sort of formal 360s and so on, I'm talking about, everyone gets to write down 2 things that they really admire about you, or something that's really stuck out. When you then read that back, the comments I hear leaders say is like, I never knew people recognize that in me, or I didn't think I was that great at that. And you start to open up people's own reality around what they are capable of, what they're good at. And you can see people almost growing in front of their peers when they realize that there's a whole heap of stuff about them that they didn't realize. And likewise, when people have the courage to say, I'm not so good at this. So I'm working with, I work quite a lot with MDs and CEOs, and I'm working with a CEO at the moment who is really anxious about fulfilling this role as a CEO because of what he tells himself that role requires. And he's like, I'm actually really good at this stuff over here, and I'm not so good at what I think I should be doing, but I got people on my team who are awesome at that. I'm like, well, who makes up the rules? If you are brilliant at bringing in clients, and which is what your company needs, and you've got someone over here who's brilliant at this other stuff, let them know that and give that responsibility to them, because that helps them grow. And that gives you space to then really thrive in the areas that you're good at. So it's having the confidence to ask for feedback, which people tend to be a little bit reluctant to do because they're worried about what's going to come up.
Well, so let's do. So Gareth, make sure we lose this in the edit because this shouldn't go out. I'm going to say I'm the traditional English person. I think there's no such thing as a traditional English person, but I get really nervous about that. Genuinely. And I'd like to think I'm a reasonably confident person and a confident leader. I've been around long enough to know what I'm good and bad at. I really am not comfortable either being told what I am good at, because I don't know how to take that.
Yeah.
And I am very nervous about the what I am bad at, because nobody likes being told they're bad at something. And don't get me wrong, you can use different words. You can say, what could you improve? But fundamentally, I get very nervous. Never mind the podcast. What's your advice to me? How do I start tackling it?
It's a normal response, and people feel very uncomfortable when they get positive feedback. It's like, oh, I don't really know what to do with that, and what do I say? And again, but normalizing that. So if people find it difficult having those conversations, and you certainly wouldn't do it as a group, you would do it one-to-one to start with until you feel a bit more confident with that. But I think normalizing that, gosh, it feels really uncomfortable, doesn't it? And letting that person know that, or letting you know that everyone, that is a normal response to feel uncomfortable. But then also to not accept that discomfort as a reason not to do it. And that discomfort can arise because we haven't had enough positive feedback. We're not used to it, or we're functioning in an environment where perhaps there's more criticism, or you can have positive feedback in one minute and then the very sharply turns the next minute and it feels very unpredictable. So I think where people are feel more secure in terms of receiving and giving feedback to each other is where it has been practiced a lot, and where it sort of sits within that kind of is embedded within an environment of psychological safety, where people don't feel on edge.
We should come back to psychological safety. I wonder whether there's another thing as well, which is, as a leader, this is going to sound cheesy, I'm not in it for praise, because that's not what leaders should do. So I don't like that, or I don't know how to deal with that. And as a leader, I shouldn't have weaknesses, and so I don't like that as well. So I wonder whether there's the position also in itself makes it harder. For example, I could imagine a CEO standing up saying, tell me what I should do better. No, you're the CEO. You're the one who tells us what we should. So there's something there about the self-fulfilling prophecy of you're a leader and therefore you can't have these thoughts.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on with that. And that's where I spend quite a bit of time working with leaders and their teams, collectively talking about the importance of vulnerability and role modeling. We will often set up, if I'm going to be having a conversation that requires some vulnerability, I'll often speak to the leader first and talk about the importance of going first and being vulnerable, because you set the scene for everyone else. And actually the power of being able to put your hands up and say, I don't feel, I've taken on a new role. I might be a new CEO, I might be new to being an MD or new to being a leader. And I want some advice or some guidance from you in terms of what that looks like for you. And I don't think that's a sign of weakness. I think that's a sign of strength, because you're showing a sense of wanting to be the best leader you can be for the team you're serving. So if I was a CEO or an MD in one company and I go to another company, I still need to ask the question of that new team, even if I'm experienced, what do you need from me? How can I lead you best? Because what that team needs potentially is very different to another team in the same organization, and, particularly if it's a different organization. So I think the vulnerability with that is absolutely key. But it does take a little bit of practice around the kinds of questions, and just going and actually owning your feelings. So when you're talking to your team, saying, gosh, I feel really vulnerable asking this, but I want to ask you because I value you and I want to make sure I'm doing the best for you. So I'm going to ask you, how can I lead you best? What can I do to be most helpful to you? Really powerful.
So far, Lisa, you've talked about teams, and you've talked about the importance of personal relationships between the leader and presumably the followers or the team members. We've in the past talked about different levels of leadership, and if I use a military example, I was what would be considered a fairly junior leader, in that I was a troop commander. So I had about 30 to 35 Marines, and I knew every single one of them. I knew their names, I knew their domestic situations, I knew their likes, their dislikes. We all lived in the same trenches and in the same conditions. But of course, you've got generals who are commanding divisions where they've got thousands of people. So you talked about a few minutes ago about psychological safety, and that's a thing that is a cultural trait you're trying to build across a larger organization. So how do you scale up? How do you get that level of understanding and empathy, but across organizations where you are perhaps leading people that there's too many to be able to personally know all of them?
I've worked a number of years ago with an NHS leadership team, which was huge. And of course, you're working with people at the top, and then they have the next level down, and so on. And when you start working with the people at the top of an organization and they're getting it right, and showing a kind of willingness to learn and to develop in the space, and then that can filter down to the next level. But it has to come from the top down. You can have, and I've worked in organizations before that are very large, where it's not been a very psychologically safe environment, but you can have pockets of exceptional practice led by a particular individual or a particular team. But then that becomes quite isolated, and that leader then ends up spending a huge amount of time trying to protect their team. I think when you're working with, it doesn't matter how high up you are in an organization, you are still going to have a group of people around you that you are leading. And it's about how you role model to them and how you set the environment with them, because you are then communicating what is expected here. And it goes back to values, and it goes back to, being very clear on the values, being very clear on what's expected, what the behaviours are that for those values to be fulfilled. What are we actually recognizing in our organization? So again, you've got too many people pay lip service to, these values are really important, but we're not really clear about what they look like in practice. Or we want people to work together as a team, but we're going to set everyone individual goals rather than collective goals. And there are so many things that don't quite align. So we have to be very clear at the very top about what is important to them. And if they are clear about what's important and what that looks like, so what good looks like, and how to achieve that, and then what is needed then to make sure that that is then cascading down to the next level, and so on. So I'm working with an organisation at the moment where we're working with the leadership team who are moving forward, developing, doing all sorts of amazing things. But then you go down a couple of levels to the managers, and they haven't yet been kind of touched by the stuff that the leaders are doing. And there needs to be space, there needs to be kind of those intentional connections for all that good stuff to come down.
Well, that was a point I wanted to make, and I think it's it's to get to a point where you start these things is a big enough change in most organizations. The bit about making it go down the organization is really important. And you use the word purposeful, which is really important, which is, this is how I've seen it happen. My managers say to me, what did you do at your offsite? And we said, we had this fantastic thing where we all were honest with each other, talked about things we were good at. And they say, that sounds fantastic. And we say, yes, it was fantastic. End of meeting. And it's like, well, why aren't they doing it? Well, because they don't know how to do it and because we didn't say it was important. So the purposeful for me is we have now learned a new skill, let's say.
Yeah.
How do we make sure people all the way down the organization not only do that, but more importantly, can learn that skill as well? Because me turning around to my managers and saying, oh, yeah, we got in a room for an hour and we said, what do you do well, do you do poorly? You should do that with your team. Not good enough. Very poor, dangerous outcomes. It needs to be intentional all the way through. But Gareth, I wanted to come back to you, and because I think here's an assumption I've got, here's a hypothesis. Many organizations, probably most, don't practice these things we've talked about. I've worked in a number of organizations, and honestly, it's 50-50 at an executive level where they've done that versus not done that. I think there are lots of people who are probably uncomfortable with the idea, who even talk about it, they get all a bit nervous. And so I don't know, that happens to me. Say something like, well, we've not done it, and I've not done it before, and we were just fine, so I can put it to one side. This feels to me like for want of a better word, an accelerator. Yeah, you can build high-performing teams where you don't know what they did at the weekend and you don't understand those core motivations. You can do that, but you want to go to the next level. You want to elevate your leadership team. You can do that. Now, coming on to you, Gareth, this sounds like military hippy-dippy nonsense. Soldier A, what did you do at the weekend? What do you want to be in the future? Did your parents treat you nicely? Talk to me about this, because I get the feeling there's, at the kinetic level, we've talked in the past about your counter-piracy work. It strikes me that if you don't have that level of trust with them, so talk to me about this hippy-dippy nonsense in the civilian world. Presumably everyone rejects that in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have haircuts and get shouted at, and we only ever communicate with barking orders at each other. Yeah, we've talked about this before. I think it's interesting, and if you take the military is really useful as an example, because we have very tangible hierarchies, structure. So you can talk about the junior commander, and you can talk about the general or the senior commander. And what's interesting is that personal relationship, I think, is just as important if you are a corporal in charge of 7 others and you are living in a trench with those 7 people, or if you're a general in charge of 7,000 people. You still need to have the trust that when they ask you to do something really difficult, they're doing it for the right reasons. And that comes down to exactly what we're talking about. So really small teams, you are living in the pockets of the people next to you. And so you have to get to know them, and you have to know what makes them tick, and you have to take that into account and adapt your leadership style to how people are feeling in the moment. Dealing with scared Marines is very different to dealing with excited Marines, to dealing with bored Marines. And so adapting to that by knowing them is really important. When you're in a more senior position, I think you're relying far more on the narrative of who you are. And therefore, it's about how people perceive you rather than actually know you. And that's quite important. And it's important to recognize that, because what you don't want to do is create a false narrative. But I think also in the military, we're quite lucky that we have a whole load of sort of cultural artifacts that bring us together. So we have language that we use that civilians don't use. We wear uniforms, we have cap badges, we behave in a particular way that we've conformed to. And that means even if you haven't met that person before, you kind of know who they are. You have a really good sense of who they are. And there's more you can do, but it means you can form really ad hoc teams very quickly, and there's already a common bond and a common understanding. I think that's really important.
Is it fair to say as well, I might be being too narrow, sport is another one of those things, because I don't think in the military you have a Monday morning meeting where you have the lads in a room and you say, what did you all do at the weekend? And you say, well, I get the feeling that an equivalent, or at least a different way of looking at this, which maybe it's hard to do in the civilian world, but it is that sport is the great equalizer. Sport is the thing where you take your rank off, where you go drinking, where you learn about them, where people relax and tell you more. Do you think that's something that's a little bit different from the civilian world, where you do have to rely on the more structured work time sort of ways of interacting?
Yeah, potentially. I think there's a lot more opportunity to do things socially as a group when you are deployed, as a group overseas and you're there 24 hours a day, or if you're living on a base. But I also think, there are times where you do ask what people have done over the weekend. And one of the things that happens in the military that doesn't happen in the civilian workplace is we parade. And I don't mean marching up and down parade squares. A parade is simply just a gathering of people, but we will all gather together before we start with the day's tasks. And so there's an opportunity there to get everybody together, check everybody's okay, is anybody missing? And that's where you can say, anything interesting happening over the weekend? Oh, you want to hear about Smudge Boss and the scrapes he got into. And then you do have these stories. So I think those kind of forced interactions, we bring people together, create those opportunities that perhaps are missing in a workplace if you just, turn up, put your packed lunch in the drawer and sit at your desk. You don't have those, natural interactions quite as much.
One of the things in our organization, which I loved, some of my managers did, was they've created a bi-weekly half-an-hour meeting where there is no agenda and there is no work. In fact, that is the only thing you are not allowed to bring to that meeting is work. It's trying to make up for the fact that the water cooler no longer exists because we're all in different locations. And so where that natural at lunchtime, you'd sit and have your lunch with someone and chat to them. I thought that was quite interesting as well.
But it's interesting how many people think that's a bit of a waste of time. So I think it's a great practice to actually have time that there is no agenda, or that there is part of a meeting that there is just free discussion. And it's something I recommend a lot, but there's the first thing that gets pushed out or you get pushed back on in terms of, well, we're too busy here to do that. But if you're not a team, if you don't connect, if you don't feel a connection and, that sense of relying on each other as teammates, how does it feel to have my teammates around me and know that they've got my back or I can help them out? If you don't have that, it can become very lonely very quickly. So yeah, I think there's a whole, and again, people talk about it as being fluffy, but actually creating the space for people just to connect is about an opportunity for your brain not to be on, and then it reduces your emotional arousal. And you have your best ideas when you're in the shower or in the middle of the night. So you're not pushing them, you're not forcing them. You are doing something completely different. And that's when your brain has time to kind of process. And it's like, actually, here's the next best thing.
I really worry that people listening to us think we're a bunch of fluffy liberals, not this podcast, but just all of the episodes we do. The thing that I come back to time and time again is, while I would like to think I'm a little bit fluffy, actually, this is about high-performing teams. And we've talked about this a lot in terms of the military, where they have a slight advantage, I think, which is there is a training period and there is an operational period. There's lines. And I, as we were talking, I was thinking about this, which is like a great piece of music, the tempo changes. If a piece of music was the same tempo, the same tune, it gets boring and it's not effective. But it's that change in tempo, the ability to slow down, to give yourself a bit of time, that allows you then to speed up. And you can't just be. So I love this idea of having a meeting where there is no agenda. As you exactly say, people are like, don't, come on, we got to go. It's all going on. Yeah, but if you don't, you lose. The people will recharge their battery in that half an hour by a couple of days worth, just because they get to sit down and go, oh, Would you mean you went to a dog show this weekend? Yeah, it's really good. I love dogs as well, or whatever
Yeah.
it might be.
It's also goes back to in that time being very intentional about the energy you're bringing. So again, this conversation I was having with the leadership team today around if one person's turning up who's quite senior and they're quite flat because they're feeling there's a lot to do and they're worried about that. They're very aware that they then impact everyone else in that group. And that there were some observations made, talking about feedback today, that actually the feeling can just be one of kind of feeling flat and lifeless and people being grumpy. And we were talking about the need to be very self-aware of the energy that people are bringing. And you can have that time when you show up and you check in, you take your mask off, you say, I'm on my knees right now, or I'm really excited, or whatever. You're being very genuine. But then there's got to be a kind of turning point to, okay, let's change the beat. So going back to your kind of music analogy, let's think about, okay, how do we move forward? If we're feeling a bit flat, that's not going to be great for us in terms of how we feel, and that's not going to be great for our performance. So how are we going to change that? What can we start to do to move a tiny bit closer to actually something that does feel a bit better, a bit more meaningful, a bit more engaging? So actually just being very conscious of that beat for ourselves and our meetings, our colleagues.
It turns out this is quite difficult. Let's take a very quick break. We haven't managed to break you with our questions yet.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back after the break and talk about psychological safety. We've talked a bit about that in the past. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but I then want to dig in and talk about when it's hard to be psychologically safe when you're in a situation where there's great stress or troubles, because I always seem to be in those situations where it's much harder. Anyway, let's come back straight after the break and we'll talk more with Lisa Lloyd and we'll ask you questions about psychological safety. Welcome back. Sorry, Lisa, I'm still overexcited about this because it's so good to have someone who understands how people think and work and applies that to these principles. Just for the break, I said we wanted to talk about psychological safety. We'll get to the bit about how you manage that when it's more difficult to do so. But why don't you start just by talking about maybe the importance of psychological safety, what it really means, and how do you actually create that? Because everyone goes, of course we're a psychologically safe organization. Of course, right? Blogs, this is a psychological... Oh, wait. Talk to me about psychological safety in a team.
So yeah, the term is rubbish because no one actually knows what it means and it doesn't change anything. And I think one of the best things to do as a team, again, I'm a real fan of just putting things on the table. So for the leader to put on the table and say, right, actually, let's get our heads around this together. So again, it takes the pressure off the leader having to know all about this stuff and say, I think this is important. I'd really like to explore it together. And so what do we mean by psychological safety? And asking people what they think that means and looks like for them. So that ability to be authentic is hugely important. That ability to ask questions without fear of criticism. The number of people who I know who have worked in roles for like 20 years, and I can't ask that question now because I should know that. I've been doing it for 20 years. So being able to ask questions, being able to suggest different ideas, the idea of talking with some leaders today about conflict, and people don't like disagreement. They don't know how to have challenging conversations. So the idea of psychological safety in terms of how we say what needs to be said, but in a way that is also appropriate. So we're not just coming out and blurting something out without thought about how that will land, but we know that if we are thoughtful and considerate about how we communicate, that is going to be received, because we have, again, as a team, established what we mean by psychological safety. We've talked about the behaviours that are important features of that. We've talked about our expectations around that. We've also made it clear what's not okay. But again, the leader has to role model that. So the leader has to be the person who's showing up and saying, I have no idea how to do this. Can someone help me? Or I've got this wrong. I've made a mistake. I'm really sorry. Or, being able to be very honest themselves, because unless the leader does it and says, I'm really struggling with this, no one else is going to do it. It's like the classic leader who says, make sure you're not working in your evenings, but then there's there sitting all evening emailing their team, and the team's going, well, they're clearly expecting me to work. So it's being very clear about the specific behaviours around being able to ask questions and taking psychological safety down to the specific behaviours, and think as a team, let's for the next week all own our mistakes, or let's for the next week ask as many questions as we can of each other, or say what we don't know, and just being able to break it down to the smallest behaviours. So if we talk about general concepts, they're nominalizations, they don't mean anything. So we need to be very, very clear about specific behaviours that we want to experience and reward and recognise those. So again, as a leader, being able to say, well done, Gareth, because it was great that you brought a mistake to the group, because we've all been able to learn from that. And actually now our processes are stronger, our product or our outcomes are better. And actually being able to recognise and reward that, because people tend to reward and give recognition for the kind of outcomes that a company's looking for, an organisation's looking for, and not the behaviours that go into that. So we need to be once we've got that set of behaviours very well established, how do we make sure that they are coming to life, and how do we keep feeding that back?
So there's scribbling down multiple things. I'll try and go through them one by one. Here's the first concern I would bring. You've used the phrase lots. As a leader, I don't know. And for many leaders, that is the only thing they're not allowed to do. Leaders must know the answer because they're leaders. And in fact, by the way, I'm playing devil's advocate because I don't believe that, but there is a risk. I have seen leaders who were weak and poor leaders who said they didn't know. And I have seen good leaders who say, I don't know. Talk about the difference between the two, because there's a point at which the team say, why the hell are they the leader if they don't know? Which is very different from what you're talking about, which is saying, I am the leader. I'm setting the examples. I'm in control and I'm driving us forward. But as part of that, in a very controlled way, we have safety. And talk to me about the difference between a good leader who says, I don't know, and a poor leader who says, well, I don't know.
Well, you know what? So it reminds me of a company I went into once where the MD was really worried about a member of her leadership team because they were saying they didn't know about a lot of stuff. And the MD was bending over backwards to provide so much support for this person. So it's this constant, I don't know. And lots of advice, lots of help was given to this individual, and nothing changed. And at some point, there was there had to be a decision made about, actually, is this person growing? Are they curious and wanting to learn and develop and hearing what's going about around them, what's needed of them, and responding to that? Or are they just saying, I don't know, and actually I don't really care that much, or I don't know and I'm not, this is beyond my skill set, or beyond my interest, whatever the barrier is. And that has to be worked out. And again, people shouldn't be afraid of calling that out, because there are too many people who are now almost quite afraid of calling out people when they're not changing, they're not developing, and they're not fulfilling what's needed of them. But that goes back to being crystal clear about the behaviours that leaders need to demonstrate, so that we can then go back and say, well, hang on a minute, this is what we need from you. We're giving you the important bit. We're giving the opportunity to learn and develop them, because it's no good just saying we need them and you're not showing them, so off you go. But we are supporting you. You're asking the questions. You're getting all the feedback about this is what's needed of you, but you're still not responding. But contrast that to a leader who already has signs of good leadership, because it's not about being in control. And in terms of being controlling, it's not about knowing all the answers. It's about creating a space where everyone can show up everyone in that team is there for a reason. And it's about creating a space where everyone can show up and shine. They can bring their best selves to work and do their best performance because the leader has created the environment where they can do that safely. So that's yeah. Go on, Gareth. You're going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's also an important aspect of there are certain things that you can't say I don't know about.
Yeah.
There are responsibilities that come with being a leader. And I remember having this conversation with he's been a guest on our podcast before. He was a colonel at the time, he's now a brigadier, but Joe Brown. And I was talking to him about where you get the balance between motivating and inspiring people to follow you versus being honest and open and building that safety and building that culture and being humble enough to accept that you don't have the monopoly on all the good ideas. And he said something that has stayed with me that I think is brilliant. He said, it's a leader's job to sell hope. Don't sell bullshit. And if you don't know the answer, then ask. But there are certain things that you need to know. There are certain things that you are expected to know. And I think there's a real danger that if we start saying, it's okay to say I don't know, then that almost lets people off the hook about professional pride and whatever they do. There is a point where if you are given a role, you need to know the stuff that needs to be communicated between the people that look to you for answers and the people that you look to. And if you're not interested or professionally not capable, then you're going to be a bad leader, even though you're saying I don't know. So I think there's this really interesting balance, but it comes down to curiosity, professional pride, and getting that sense of the people that you're leading. Am I, by saying I don't know, empowering them and giving them a voice, or am I just sapping everybody's confidence that we know what we're doing?
That's the point. And I think, Lisa, you nailed this, which is it's about progression, which is it's okay not to know a thing, but you better know that thing next time. And that's true of the leader and the people following you. And there's obviously this whole thing is around psychological safety. Sorry to use the word. I know what you mean about it being a terrible word. This is a phrase that my current CEO uses, which is we aspire to make original mistakes. And I think that is such a cleverly constructed phrase because by definition, it says, I, as the leader of this organization, I am aspiring that you will make mistakes, but I am aspiring that you will make a specific kind of mistake. So there's both safety, that making a mistake is not only a thing you could do, it is a thing I will applaud. But I'm very clear about the kind of mistake. And if you keep making the same mistake, you aren't showing progression. If you make an original mistake, that's an opportunity to learn. So I love that. There's another element in here that we're skimming over, I think. They're almost an assumption that it's there, which is trust. The idea that one of my team can say to me, boss, I don't know, assumes they trust that I'm not going to go, you idiot, you're fired. And for me, perhaps even more so to say to my team, I don't know, that requires trust that they don't, exactly as Gareth say, go, hang on a minute, you're supposed to know this nonsense. Why do you not know? Talk to me about trust and how you can, a strategy for building that over time. Because I don't want to say, how do you build trust? It's like, no, we're not going to stand there and fall off a wall and catch everyone. That's mumbo jumbo nonsense. Talk about trust, because it feels like it's the thing that without it, everything we've said today becomes irrelevant.
The trust, it goes, like you said, it goes back to the leader being vulnerable. Without the leader having some vulnerability, achieving that trust will be much harder. And for the leader to be able to ask questions about what is the team, what's important to the team, how does the team, shaping the plans as much as you can together. Obviously, the leader has to have certain say in certain things depending on the organisation, but being able to to step into being part of your team rather than sitting above your team. So when the leader kind of joins the team at the table, it says, right, this is the thing we need to achieve. These are the objectives for this team. How should we do that? And starts putting the trust in other people and actively asking for their ideas and drawing on other people's strengths and resources. And you're starting to, as a leader, you're putting your trust in others. And then you're asking as well what they need from you. And you might not say, I don't know something, but how can I do this better? What is it you need me to do to support you to be able to achieve your bit of this plan, and making sure that you deliver on it so that they then know that they can trust you. And it's the little behaviours day to day that we don't really take as much or pay as much attention to as the big things. And the trust comes from all the tiny, tiny transactions, the things that happen or don't happen. And people tend to focus on, we've got to have a big team day that develops trust, or these big whatever activities. You can do that, and people, as you say, people have these amazing experiences and they go back into real life, and it's the stuff that gets dropped, or it's the little comments that people hear, or the facial expression when someone does say something. It's all that stuff. It's the tiny, tiny things.
This is something I learned a long time ago. Every day, every conversation is an audition.
Yeah.
It's like with kids. People say to me, oh, what are you going to do to make sure your kids are going to be successful going on to life? And I'm like, that ship has sailed. My 18-year-old has been listening to me for 18 years. If I've done a bad job, he's screwed already. There's nothing I can do now. He knows when I'm bullshitting him. He knows when I'm doing the wrong thing or right thing because he's watched me. So I think that's really important. So just after the break, we talked about psychological safety, and I think this is a personal view. I think this stuff is so important, and I think there's an underlying message, which is it is not the leader that is going to win the war or make your business successful. It is the team. And I think we've got this slightly weird thing that it's all about the leader and then we'll all be good. What you've just said, and I am sure, and we do need to do this at some point, get an Olympic coach on. I am betting what we have talked about today, Olympic coach would roll his eyes and goes, of course, that's what I do every day. We think about, we all have to be safe. Now I want to change though to something, which is, this is something I've encountered and I've felt. Pretty much every company I know has said, yeah, we kind of get emotional safety. We get that. We also get all the things that we're supposed to do to create a healthy team. The problem is when it all starts to go to rats in the business, you're not hitting targets, when something has to be delivered for a customer, all of those things get jettisoned immediately. And I say that with personal, all the reasons why we did it when things were going well are the reasons doubly so why we should do it when they don't go well. Talk to me about how leaders can maintain that safe culture when things are going wrong and arguably when you need it the most.
Well, it's interesting you give that example, because there are a number of organisations who I'm working with who are in that situation at the moment. And one of the key messages for leaders in that space is they have to push back. So whoever is putting the pressure on to deliver certain results, leaders have got to feel, and that is part of their responsibility. We talked about, you can't just give that away and just say, actually, I don't know. Part of that is about, you have to take responsibility for looking after your team. And so if you have unreasonable demands being made of your team, to be able to say that is just not possible right now, and these are the resources we have, and this is the best way of going about it. And I think to be able to communicate, again, when I've seen teams do this really well, when the leader is able to firstly push back and say, if you want us to take that on, if that's really important, then we need to drop something else, because we can't just keep taking on more and more and more. And being able to communicate that to the team, so that, again, the team knows that leader is protecting them. But also for the leader to say to the team, this is what we've got to try and achieve right now, and it feels impossible, and acknowledging it. I'm all about owning feelings and just naming it. it feels like an impossible task. So let's look at how we achieve this together. And it goes back to the team coming up with their strategy for this period of time. And it might be, you'll have your longer term strategies and plans and so on. But we've got this like really critical moment for the next 3 months. And it feels impossible. So let's, rather than just kind of put our heads down and just scurry around and hope for the best, let's acknowledge it and let's put it on the table and say, right, who has got capacity to do what, or what can we push back on? How can we reprioritize? And that's the stuff that when you create the space to do that, again, this team I was working with this afternoon, we're doing exactly that. They're saying they are feeling that they are sinking under being busy. And they said, we just need some time to take a step back and say, what are our priorities? What do we need to pause? This person over here has got a little bit more capacity. So they're going to find out what are the needs and take on some of the topics or projects. So it's about having the very open and honest conversations and then being able to push back to people and say, this is what's possible, this is what's not.
I wonder if there's also something about how you manage jeopardy, because there's a cascading weight that goes down. We need to hit our targets, because I know if we don't hit our targets at some point, we can't afford to hire everyone. And so I turn around and say, everyone, we must hit the targets or something terrible will happen. Okay, yeah, that's my problem. But by the way, this shouldn't be their problem to carry. They need to operate at their highest level. But the idea that somehow they're going to fail for something that's my problem, I've often found that quite difficult, which is, and I get people who push back on this, like, no, they have to understand what the results are. Like, if you tell me if I fail, we're all going to die, that is going to have a negative impact. If you turn it the other way around and say, this is a really hard challenge, can we meet it? How close can we get to it, or could we exceed it? Now it's a different problem. Now it's not jeopardy. You're offering me jeopardy and risk and failure, and you have to die to prevent failure. All of a sudden, now it's an opportunity. And I know that sounds crappy, the language, it's an opportunity, not blah, but it's true. And I found that sometimes where psychologically, safety doesn't mean telling me that it's all going to go horribly wrong if you don't do this thing. And I've seen this with people where they say, in my world of software, particularly when they're customers, the customer's been suffering because of this. It's like, stop saying that. We get that. You do not have to keep telling us. And by the way, you've now filled a bit of their head with how bad they feel about this. That makes them no more effective. No, but I'm going to motivate them. That's not motivation. So there's something about jeopardy, which I think some people think is a motivator. And I think for most people is a distraction.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about jeopardy, but actually I think we're talking about risk. Jeopardy is a feeling you have about uncertainty. The time that you need psychological safety is when everything feels uncomfortable and is starting to go wrong. The reason it's going wrong is because you're in new territory, you're doing things differently, and that's where you need teams that are willing to take risks, that are willing to try things, that are feeling empowered to make decisions. Otherwise, all that happens is, as you say, we talk a great game about psychological safety, about having this wonderful culture, and we empower people, and then the moment you need free thinking, experimentation, you go, this is too important for this, and you put it all back in. And I've literally had somebody say to me, yeah, I know we were talking about psychological safety and empowerment, Gareth, but this is too important for that, and I'm telling you now what we're doing. And all that you're doing there is closing all of the free thinking down and making it that person's problem.
Well, you've also done that thing we've talked about. Every day is an audition. Every sentence of what that person has literally told you. I actually don't really care about psychological safety. You know, when things are going my way, sure, I'll tell you I care about it. But the moment it isn't going my way, I don't care about it. think, Lisa, we're probably going to have to get you back on because you can tell. And by the way we'll get you back on is we'll do this down the pub. How about that? It goes back to our roots and we can do it down the pub. Last thing, though, I wanted to ask you very quickly as a sort of a quick finisher. What's something you wish more leaders understood about the people they work with? I'm sorry, I'm going with what's the one thing? It's kind of the LinkedIn post, but I'm sure you've got this sort of thing of every time I meet people, they don't understand this. What would be your one thing you wish more people understood?
That underneath all the uniforms, role titles, everything else, we are just human people who all have our own set of fears and anxieties and excitements and everything else. And actually, we just have to be aware of our snap judgments that we make about people and just think, what's this person really like beyond their title?
And I always get this wrong. It's not Clausewitz, is it, Gareth? It's someone else who said, this is easy, but easy things are hard. And I think that's exactly what we've talked about today, which is all of this is common sense. All of this is easy, but doing easy things is often very hard. Lisa, thank you. Before you go, tell us about your podcast, Beyond the Water Cooler. Tell us why people should listen to it, obviously after they've listened to Battling with Business, and where they can find you.
Okay, so the podcast is all about kind of the stuff that we've been talking about today. It's all the stuff around leadership, company culture, well-being, everything that people need in terms of being able to thrive and perform well. And it's a very natural conversation from people who are either experts or have just lived and breathed this stuff through their own practice. People can find it on pretty much any of the main platforms, or it's on my website, it's timeforchange.co.uk. And yeah, there's Gareth is on there very, very recently. But it's a good place to come and just explore some different ideas, just as we have done today. It's very similar to this kind of format.
And if someone wants to learn more about your business, because they're going, we could do with you and come and talking to us about psychological safety or some of these things, how do they find you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, on my website or on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I don't know if you put any contacts in your show notes for your podcast or anything.
We most certainly will.
On LinkedIn, and I love to talk, as people might discover. So just reach out to me and just say, I'm curious to have a chat. And I just love being at the pub or a cafe or online, and less online. But yeah, just having a chat with people and saying, where are we at and what are people curious about, and going from there.
I fear I've set a very poor precedent, Gareth, where we've now offered pub visits for all of our guests. But I think I can't back down now. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, and we will hold you to that. We'll come back and have a further conversation, because I think we've only scratched the surface of what makes us tick as humans, as leaders, and we'll come back and do more. Thank you for joining us this week on Battling with Business. Here's the usual spiel. If you have listened to us and you've got an idea for a new episode, or you listened to something we said and were angry because I'm a fluffy liberal, please email us at battlingwithbusiness@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Or if you'd like to come and talk to us about something, we'd love to hear from you. We are available on Twitter and Blue Sky on Battling with Biz with a Z. If you have not subscribed, if you are a new listener because you heard Lisa was on, you thought, come and listen to that. Obviously, subscribe to Lisa's podcast first. But once you've done that, please do subscribe to ours. And actually, I was looking at this earlier on today. We were talking to a guest who's hopefully going to be coming on. I haven't counted it recently, more than 120 episodes of Battling with Business. There are pretty much episodes on almost any topic you could imagine. And as we were talking about narrative, I was thinking, I think it was episode number 2, personal narrative, still one of my favorites. There's something for everyone, so please go listen to it. And last but not least, if you have enjoyed this conversation, please do tell your friends. And if you don't want to tell them about the podcast, that's fine. Go have a conversation about psychological safety. Do us a favor. Go talk to your team. Go talk to your manager. Go start the conversation, because that's actually what started all of this and made us so passionate. But for now, thank you very much for joining us on Battling with Business. We'll see you all soon. Thanks to Lisa, and thanks to Gareth, who's in a very exotic Swindon today.
Thanks very much. Cheerio.